I caught her adjusting her bra using my car window as a mirror. She had no idea I was watching from inside, or that in just 45 minutes, I'd be interviewing her for a position at my company. The resume in her trembling hands told me she needed this job desperately. What she didn't know was how her authenticity would cut through the fake smiles and rehearsed answers I'd seen all day. When she walked into that interview room and recognized me, her face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. But what happened next changed both our lives forever. Alice Park clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hands as she studied her reflection in her bathroom's cracked mirror. The harsh fluorescent light did her no favors, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes from another sleepless night. The notice gave her 30 days to vacate the apartment she'd called home for the past 3 years. 30 days to figure out her life. But today could change everything. Her phone alarm blared, jolting her back to reality. The interview at New Gen Corp was in exactly 1 hour. As one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the city, landing this job would mean a salary that could dig her out of the financial hole she'd fallen into after her mother's medical bills had drained her savings. This wasn't just another job interview. It was her lifeline. Alice splashed cold water on her face and tried to steady her breathing. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "You have to do this." Her resume was impressive enough to get her foot in the door, but in the tech world, first impressions were everything. She needed to look polished, confident, professional. 20 minutes later, disaster struck. The bus she needed to catch was pulling away just as she reached the stop, forcing her to sprint 3 blocks to catch the next one. By the time she arrived at the towering glass building that housed New Gen Corp, her carefully planned schedule was in shambles. She had exactly 7 minutes to compose herself before the interview. Panting, hair windblown, and feeling a bead of sweat trickling down her back, Alice frantically searched for a restroom. The building's revolving doors looked intimidating, requiring a security badge she didn't have. That's when she noticed it. A sleek black car with tinted windows, parked right outside the entrance. The glossy surface reflected the morning sun perfectly, a mirror, an answer to her prayers. Alice glanced around quickly. The sidewalk was mostly empty, with only a few people hurrying past, eyes glued to their phones. She sidled up to the car, pretending to check her phone while stealing glances at her reflection. What she saw made her heart sink. A piece of spinach was lodged between her front teeth, evidence of the breakfast sandwich she'd scarfed down before leaving her apartment. 5 minutes to interview time. In a moment of desperation, Alice set her purse down on the sidewalk and went to work. She adjusted her ill-fitting bra that had shifted during her mad dash to the bus, wincing as she realized the buttons of her blouse were straining slightly. She dug through her purse, found her lipstick, and hastily applied it, using the car window as her guide. Then, with her index finger, she tried to dislodge the stubborn piece of spinach from between her teeth, making exaggerated faces at the tinted window. "Come on, you little green monster," she muttered, pressing her face closer to the window, tongue working furiously against her teeth. That's when it happened. With a soft electronic hum, the tinted window began to lower. Alice froze, finger still in her mouth, eyes widening in horror as the glass descended to reveal a man sitting in the back seat of the car. Not just any man, a devastatingly handsome man in an impeccably tailored suit, with dark eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners as he regarded her with undisguised amusement. Time stood still as their eyes locked. Alice's brain frantically cycled through her options: run away screaming, pretend she was having a medical emergency, or faint on the spot. None seemed particularly dignified. "I think you got it," the man said, his voice deep and tinged with humor. "The spinach, I mean." Alice slowly lowered her finger from her mouth, mortification burning through her veins. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. She began, then stopped. There was no explanation that could possibly salvage this situation. The man raised an eyebrow, waiting. Something about his patient expression, the lack of judgment in his eyes, gave Alice a sudden burst of courage. Or perhaps it was just the knowledge that things couldn't possibly get any worse. "I was just giving you a free show," she said with a shrug and a half smile. "Usually I charge for the full dental examination and wardrobe adjustment spectacle. You got lucky today." For a moment, the man just stared at her, Then his face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Alice's heart skip a beat. "I certainly did," he replied, his eyes sparkling. "Most people just check their emails outside my car." Alice's phone buzzed in her hand. The interview. 2 minutes. "I'd love to stay and chat about my innovative approach to car window utilization, but I have a job interview that I'm about to be late for," she said, already backing away. "Enjoy the rest of your day, and, sorry about the fingerprints on your window." The man leaned forward slightly. "Good luck with your interview," he called after her. "And for what it's worth, you look great. Spinach-free and all." Alice gave him a quick wave before turning and rushing toward the building's entrance. A security guard checked her name against a list and directed her to the elevators. As she rode up to the 37th floor, she tried to compose herself, taking deep breaths and mentally reviewing her prepared answers about her experience and why she wanted to work at New Gen Corp. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sleek reception area with the company's logo emblazoned on the wall. A polished receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile. "Alice Park, for the 9:30 interview?" Alice said, trying to keep the breathlessness from her voice. The receptionist nodded. "They're ready for you. Right this way." Alice followed her down a hallway lined with glass-walled offices, straightening her blouse and smoothing her hair one last time. The receptionist stopped at a conference room door and gestured for Alice to enter. "Good luck," she said. Alice stepped into the room, professional smile in place, hand extended for a greeting, and froze. Sitting at the head of the conference table, with the same amused expression she'd just seen through a car window, was the man. Beside him sat 2 other executives who were reviewing what appeared to be her resume. "Mr. Smith, this is Alice Park, your 9:30 appointment," the receptionist announced. The man, Mr. Smith, stood and extended his hand. "Nicholas Smith, CEO of New Gen Corp," he said, his eyes twinkling with barely suppressed laughter. "It's a pleasure to meet you, officially this time." Alice's mind raced as she mechanically shook his hand. The CEO. She had just been caught adjusting her bra and picking food from her teeth while using the CEO's car as a personal grooming station. This wasn't just a disaster. It was a career-ending catastrophe before her career had even begun. But as she took her seat across from Nicholas Smith, something unexpected happened. Instead of the dismissive glance she anticipated, he looked at her with what appeared to be genuine interest, maybe even respect. "So, Ms. Park," he began, "your resume is impressive, but what I'm more interested in is how you handle unexpected situations. When things don't go according to plan, when circumstances force you to improvise." He paused, the corner of his mouth quirking upward. "How do you respond to those moments?" Alice met his gaze steadily, suddenly aware that this mortifying morning might have actually given her an edge that no other candidate could claim. She had already shown him exactly who she was. Flawed, resourceful, and able to laugh at herself, even in the most embarrassing circumstances. They say first impressions determine your entire career trajectory, but what happens when your first impression involves adjusting your underwear in the CEO's car window? For Alice, the answer wasn't career suicide, but something far more unexpected. The birth of an office legend known as Miss Lettuce, whose authenticity would shake up New Gen Corp's corporate culture in ways no one saw coming. 3 days after her car window interview disaster, Alice received a call she never expected. She'd gotten the job. Nicholas hadn't just overlooked her awkward introduction, he'd actually been impressed by it. "Your resume showed skill," he told her over the phone. "But that moment outside my car showed me something I can't teach. Authenticity, under pressure." His voice carried a hint of amusement. "And trust me, we need more of that around here." Alice arrived for her first day wearing her most professional outfit, hair perfectly in place, and absolutely no spinach in her teeth. She'd triple-checked. The receptionist's knowing smile should have been her first clue that something was off. By the time she reached her assigned desk in the open-concept workspace, Alice realized her humiliation hadn't stayed between her and Nicholas. "You must be Alice," said a woman, with bright red hair and a friendly grin, extending her hand. "I'm Emily, your desk neighbor. It's so nice to finally meet the woman brave enough to use the CEO's car as her personal beauty station." Alice's stomach dropped. "You heard about that?" Emily laughed. "Honey, Everyone heard about that. Nicholas's driver told his assistant, who told accounting, who told, well, you get the idea. Welcome to corporate communication, faster than our Wi-Fi. Before Alice could process this information, she noticed something on her desk, a small doodle of a bra and a piece of lettuce, taped to her computer monitor. Under it, in neat handwriting, "Welcome, Miss Lettuce." Alice felt her face burn. This would normally be the moment she'd grab her purse and flee, never to return. But something stopped her. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the memory of Nicholas's eyes, when he'd told her he valued authenticity. Whatever it was, Alice took a deep breath, turned to Emily and said, "Well, at least they got my measurements right." Emily nearly choked on her coffee. "Oh, I like you. You're going to need that sense of humor around here." Throughout the morning, Alice noticed the sideways glances, the whispers that stopped when she approached, and the occasional suppressed laugh. By lunchtime, she'd heard 3 different versions of her car window performance, each more elaborate than the last. In the current favorite, she'd apparently stripped down to her bra entirely, while Nicholas watched in shock. Alice was setting up her computer when a hush fell over the office. She looked up to find Nicholas standing at her desk, arms crossed, an amused expression on his face. "Miss Park," he said formally, though his eyes danced with humor, "I trust you're settling in well? No lettuce incidents today? No coffee stains?" The entire floor seemed to hold its breath. Alice straightened her spine. "Not yet, sir, but the day is young." Nicholas actually smiled, something that, judging by the shocked expressions around her, was a rare occurrence. "Good. Keep that spirit." He nodded toward her computer. "Once you're set up, Emily will show you the projects you'll be working on." As he walked away, Alice became aware of the stares from her colleagues. Emily leaned over. "He never checks in on new hires personally." "Never. Is that a problem?" Alice whispered. "Not a problem," Emily replied, "but definitely noteworthy. The Nicholas Smith I've worked under for 3 years doesn't make jokes about lettuce, or anything else." Throughout the day, Alice noticed the dual nature of her new office identity forming. To some, she was just Miss Lettuce, a walking joke. To others, she was the new hire who somehow caught the CEO's attention, which created its own complications. Alice wasn't naive. She understood workplace politics well enough to know that perceived favoritism was dangerous territory. "I just want to be taken seriously for my work," she confided to Emily during their coffee break. "Not for how I embarrassed myself or whether the boss finds it amusing." "Then prove yourself," Emily replied simply. "Nicholas might have been intrigued by your car window performance, but he's ruthless about results. That's your opportunity." The opportunity came sooner than expected. At 4:30 p.m., Alice's phone rang. "Alice, this is Nicholas. We have an investor presentation in 30 minutes. Johnson's team was supposed to handle it, but they're stuck in traffic. I need you to join me in conference room A." "Me?" Alice stammered. "But it's my first day." "Exactly. You haven't been contaminated by corporate jargon yet. 15 minutes to prepare." The call ended before she could protest. Emily gave her a sympathetic look. Baptism by fire. "Welcome to New Gen." Alice rushed to the conference room, where Nicholas handed her a tablet with the presentation already loaded. "These are potential investors for our new consumer application. The tech team has explained it in terms no human being outside engineering could possibly understand. I need you to translate." "But I haven't even seen the product," Alice protested. "Perfect. If you can understand it in 5 minutes, so can they." He gestured to the screen. "Read, interpret, be yourself." When 5 severe-looking investors filed in, Alice felt her heart hammering. Nicholas introduced her confidently as our newest talent, with a fresh perspective, as though her presence was planned all along. The presentation proceeded smoothly until they reached the technical specifications slide, where the investors' eyes began to glaze over. Nicholas smoothly pivoted. "Alice, perhaps you could explain our user interface philosophy in layman's terms?" Alice froze momentarily, then remembered Emily's advice. "Prove yourself. Do any of you ever stand in front of your microwave and just press buttons until something happens?" she asked the room. The investors blinked. Then one woman in an expensive suit chuckled. "Every day." "Exactly," Alice continued, warming to her analogy. Most tech products make us feel like we need an engineering degree to use them correctly. New Gen's approach is different. We're building this application for the microwave hackers, the people who want results without needing to understand the machinery behind it. As she continued, using everyday examples to illustrate complex features, Alice noticed the investors leaning forward, nodding. When the presentation concluded, the lead investor, the woman who'd laughed, approached Nicholas. "Refreshing approach," she said, glancing at Alice. "Technical brilliance with human accessibility. We'll be in touch next week." After they left, Nicholas turned to Alice with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The microwave hackers?" Alice winced. "Too simplistic?" "Absolutely perfect," he said. "Johnson's team would have buried them in technical specifications until their eyes bled. You made our product relatable." As they walked back to her desk, Alice noticed more stares, more whispers. Her first-day performance in the investors' meeting would now become part of her office narrative, alongside the car window incident. "They'll talk," Nicholas said quietly, noticing her discomfort. "People always talk, but give them something worth talking about." Alice nodded, realizing something important. In less than 8 hours, she'd gone from the bra-adjusting lettuce girl to the woman who saved the investor presentation. The nicknames and whispers would continue, but perhaps they didn't have to define her. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," she said. Nicholas paused, his expression serious for the first time. "I didn't take a chance, Alice. I made a calculated decision based on what I saw that morning. Most candidates show me their carefully constructed professional mask. You showed me your resourcefulness, your ability to recover from embarrassment, and your authenticity. In the corporate world, those qualities are rare and valuable. In the unforgiving world of corporate hierarchies, Alice had proven her professional worth, but the company gala would test her in ways no presentation ever could. The annual New Gen Charity Gala wasn't just any office party. It was the social event of the year, where executives mingled with investors and industry elites, judged your worth not by your skills, but by your appearance. For Alice, who had grown comfortable with her Miss Lettuce nickname and newfound respect at work, this formal setting threatened to expose the gaps between her world and Nicholas's that professional success couldn't bridge. "Just breathe," Alice whispered to herself, tugging at the hemline of Emily's borrowed dress. The midnight blue satin hung perfectly on her frame, a miracle considering Emily was 3 inches shorter. But the thrift store heels were another story. She'd spent her last $40 on the silver strappy sandals that already wobbled ominously with each step across the marble floors of the Harrington Hotel ballroom. The room sparkled with wealth and privilege. Crystal chandeliers reflected in the champagne flutes of women wearing designer dresses that cost more than Alice's rent. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed easily, comfortable in spaces that felt like second homes. Alice clutched her complimentary champagne like a shield, scanning the room for a friendly face as she carefully balanced her weight to keep her right heel from detaching completely. "There you are," Emily appeared, cocktail in hand. "I was beginning to think you'd bailed. You look amazing." "I feel like an imposter," Alice admitted. "Everyone here seems so comfortable." "That's because they've been attending these things since birth." Emily rolled her eyes. "Just fake it till you make it. Besides," her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "Nicholas has been looking for you." Alice's heart performed an inconvenient flutter. "He has. Don't look now. But 3 o'clock. Talking to the woman in red." Of course, Alice immediately looked. Nicholas stood across the room, imposing in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, nodding politely to whatever the stunning redhead was saying. Even from a distance, Alice recognized Vanessa Reardon, Nicholas's ex-girlfriend and current fashion magazine editor, whose perfect silhouette and confident posture made Alice want to shrink into the nearest potted plant. "That's Vanessa, right? They dated for what? 2 years?" Alice tried to sound casual. 3. "And she's one of 4 exes here tonight. They're all gorgeous, successful, and born with silver spoons firmly lodged in their mouths," Emily said. "But he's not looking at them. He's been glancing at the door every 5 minutes waiting for..." The sound came first, a sharp crack that echoed surprisingly loudly despite the ambient chatter and music. Then came the sensation of suddenly dropping 3 inches on her right side. Alice grabbed Emily's arm to steady herself as horrified understanding dawned. "My heel just broke," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. My heel just broke off completely. Don't move, Emily commanded. Let me see. She crouched down, inspecting the damage. Oh, wow, that's really broken. Alice stood frozen, suddenly aware of curious glances from nearby executives. Her right foot rested awkwardly flat, while her left remained elevated, creating a lopsided stance that made maintaining dignity impossible. Worse still, Nicholas had spotted her and was making his way across the room. I need to get out of here, Alice hissed. Now, Emily nodded, all business. Garden Terrace, East Side. I'll find replacement shoes. There's got to be a lost and found or something. Just stay put once you're outside. With Emily running interference, Alice hobbled as gracefully as possible, which wasn't very, toward the glass doors leading to the terrace. Each step felt like a spotlight on her inadequacy, her inability to belong in this world of wealth and privilege. She finally escaped into the cool night air, limping along the stone pathway until she found a secluded bench, partially hidden by ornamental shrubs. Alice removed both shoes, placing the broken one beside its intact twin on the bench. 3 inches of cheap plastic had nearly caused complete social humiliation. She laughed bitterly at the symbolism. No matter how well she performed at work, these subtle markers of class difference would always expose her as an outsider. Planning a midnight escape? Alice's head snapped up. Nicholas stood a few feet away, 2 glasses of champagne in hand, the soft garden lights casting gentle shadows across his face. Unless you've got a spare heel in your pocket, I might need to, she replied, attempting humor despite her mortification. Nicholas approached, handing her a glass before sitting beside her, careful to leave appropriate space between them. Emily mentioned there was a wardrobe situation. That's one way to put it. Alice gestured to the betraying footwear. Apparently 3-inch heels from Second Chance Thrift weren't designed for corporate galas. Something shifted in Nicholas's expression. Not pity, which Alice would have hated, but something softer, understanding perhaps. These events are ridiculous pressure cookers, he said, surprising her with his candidness. Everyone pretending they belong, even those born into it. Alice raised an eyebrow. Even you, especially me. He smiled ruefully. You think I was born knowing which fork to use for the fish course? My father was a mechanic. I learned all this, he gestured vaguely toward the ballroom, because I had to. The revelation stunned Alice into silence. She'd assumed Nicholas had always inhabited this world of wealth and privilege. The idea that he too had once been an outsider shifted something fundamental in her understanding of him. So we're both faking it? She finally asked. The difference is, I've had more practice, he replied. And better shoes. They both laughed, the tension dissolving between them. For the first time since their car window encounter, they weren't CEO and employee. They were just 2 people sharing a bench in a moonlit garden, connected by the strange vulnerability of being outsiders in different ways. You know, Nicholas said, his voice softening, that first day, with the lettuce in the car window, I've never met anyone so utterly themselves in the most unexpected moment. You mean utterly mortified, Alice corrected, though she was smiling. No, I mean utterly authentic. His eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. Do you know how rare that is? Most people spend their lives constructing perfect facades. You showed me something real, and I found flats. Emily's triumphant voice cut through the moment as she hurried down the garden path, waving a pair of simple black ballet flats. They're from the coat check girl, who says you can keep them because they always hurt her feet anyway. Nicholas cleared his throat, standing quickly. Excellent work, Emily. Alice, will you be rejoining the party? Alice accepted the flats, slipping them on her feet. They were a half size too big, but infinitely better than hobbling around barefoot. I suppose I should make an appearance, though I'm not sure how much networking I can do, looking like I raided the lost and found. Actually, Nicholas extended his hand toward her. I was hoping you might save me a dance. Emily's eyes widened comically as she backed away. I just remembered something urgent at the somewhere else. She disappeared down the path, leaving them alone again. Alice looked at Nicholas's outstretched hand, then back at his face. You want to dance with the girl in borrowed flats and a broken heel disaster story? I want to dance with Alice Park, who makes presentations that charm investors and who doesn't pretend to be something she's not. His hand remained extended, an invitation and a choice, even if her footwear is unconventional. In that moment, with the soft glow of garden lights and the distant strains of music floating through the air, Alice realized they had crossed some invisible threshold. This wasn't about professional courtesy or a boss being kind to an employee. This was something else entirely, something that made her heart race as she placed her hand in his. They returned to the ballroom, where Nicholas led her directly to the dance floor, seemingly oblivious to the curious glances and raised eyebrows of the corporate elite. As they moved together to the music, Alice's mismatched shoes hidden beneath the swirl of her borrowed dress, she caught Vanessa's cold stare from across the room. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured. "Let them," Nicholas replied simply, his hand warm against the small of her back. And in that moment, as they moved in perfect synchrony, despite her footwear disaster, Alice understood that the broken heel hadn't exposed her as an imposter after all. Instead, it had created something rare and unexpected, a genuine connection that transcended corporate hierarchies and social divides. Sometimes life's most meaningful moments happen in the most unexpected places. The dance floor chemistry between Alice and Nicholas had been undeniable, but what awaited them in Chicago would test the boundaries they'd carefully maintained. When two people with undeniable attraction find themselves suddenly confined in a suspended metal box 32 stories above ground, something has to give. And the universe seems to have a peculiar sense of timing when it comes to matters of the heart. 3 weeks after the gala, Alice found herself packing an overnight bag for Chicago. The annual Midwest Technology Fair was a major industry event, and after her successful investor presentations, Nicholas had personally requested she join the company delegation. "Your authentic approach resonates with people," he'd explained, his gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary. "We need that perspective in Chicago." The fair's first day had exceeded all expectations. Alice's presentation on user-centered design had drawn the largest crowd of the afternoon session, with attendees spilling into the hallway. The new Gen booth had been swarmed with potential partners, eager to connect with the company that was bringing a fresh perspective to the tech industry. "I didn't expect that standing ovation," Alice admitted as they left the convention center that evening. The sky had darkened, and Chicago's famous wind whipped around the corners of Michigan Avenue's towering buildings. "I did," Nicholas replied, with a quiet confidence that made her cheeks flush. "There's something about the way you explain complex concepts that makes people feel included rather than intimidated." They entered the gleaming Meridian Tower, heading toward the elevator that would take them to the restaurant Nicholas had reserved for a celebratory dinner. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing an empty car lined with polished brass and mirrors. Alice stepped inside, suddenly aware of her reflection, and his, multiplied infinitely around them. 32 floors, just the two of them. As the elevator began its smooth ascent, Alice became hyper-conscious of the narrowing space between them, the subtle scent of Nicholas's cologne, and the charged silence that had replaced their easy conversation. Suddenly, a mechanical groan echoed through the shaft. The elevator lurched violently, throwing Alice off balance. Nicholas reached out, steadying her with a firm hand on her waist. Before either could speak, the lights flickered once, twice, and the elevator came to a complete stop. "You've got to be kidding me," Alice whispered, her voice unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. Nicholas released her and pressed the emergency button. A crackling voice assured them help was on the way, but it might take up to 30 minutes. "Well," Nicholas said, after hanging up the emergency phone, "the universe certainly has interesting timing." His attempt at lightening the mood failed to dispel the electric tension that had settled between them. Psychological studies show that confined spaces increase emotional intimacy, Alice blurted out, immediately regretting the academic deflection. "Sorry, that was a weird thing to say." Nicholas's laugh was warm, genuine. "Actually, I believe it. There's something about being stuck that strips away pretense." He leaned against the wall, loosening his tie slightly. No corporate masks, no professional distance, just two people with nowhere to run. The elevator seemed to shrink with each passing minute. Alice found herself studying the pattern in the carpet, The emergency panel. Anything but the man standing 3 feet away, whose presence filled the entire space. "This is like something out of a movie," Nicholas finally said, breaking the thick silence. The CEO and his employee trapped in an elevator. A classic setup. "Except in movies, the power dynamic isn't quite so complicated," Alice replied, finally meeting his gaze. "The CEO isn't usually directly responsible for the employee's livelihood." Nicholas took a step closer, his expression suddenly serious. "Is that how you see this? As a power imbalance?" "Isn't it?" Alice challenged. "The office gossip machine is already working. Overtime after the gala. If this," she gestured vaguely between them, unable to find the right words. "If we what, Alice?" His voice had dropped an octave, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "If we acknowledge whatever this is between us." The flickering lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. Alice felt her professional resolve weakening with each passing second. "I've spent my entire career building walls between my personal and professional life," Nicholas continued, taking another deliberate step closer. "And then you come along, adjusting your bra in my car window, with lettuce in your teeth and more authentic brilliance than anyone I've ever met." Alice couldn't help the laugh that escaped her. "That's quite a sales pitch." "It's not a pitch, it's the truth." Another step closer. They were now standing mere inches apart. "The question is, should we make this movie real? Or do we walk out of this elevator and pretend this tension doesn't exist?" Alice's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Every professional instinct warned her about workplace romances, especially with such a significant power differential. Yet the connection between them felt too profound to dismiss as mere attraction. "What happens after?" she asked quietly. "If we cross this line, what happens when we get back to New York? When I'm in meetings with your executive team, when decisions about my career advancement come up?" "I don't have all the answers," Nicholas admitted, his honesty disarming her further. "But I know enough to recognize when something rare happens. Don't you?" In that suspended moment, with the world literally stopped around them, Alice felt the last of her resistance crumbling. Nicholas slowly raised his hand to her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as the distance between them narrowed to nothing. Their faces were so close, she could feel his breath on her lips, the anticipation almost unbearable. Just as Nicholas tilted his head to close the final distance, the elevator gave a violent jerk. The lights blazed back to full brightness, and with a cheerful ding, the car resumed its upward journey, as if nothing had happened. They sprang apart, both breathless and disoriented by the abrupt interruption. Alice smoothed her skirt, while Nicholas ran a hand through his hair, a mixture of frustration and amusement crossing his features. "The universe really does have terrible timing," he murmured, just as the door slid open to reveal the restaurant's elegant entrance. They stepped out together, the moment interrupted, but the connection undeniable. A smile spread slowly across Alice's face, matched by Nicholas's own. "Rain check?" he asked quietly, offering his arm, as they were greeted by the host. "Definitely," Alice replied, taking his arm and feeling the weight of everything unspoken between them. The rain check Alice and Nicholas agreed upon in Chicago now seemed impossible as she walked into the office Monday morning. It was as if every eye tracked her movement across the floor. Conversations hushed as she passed, only to erupt into whispers once she was a few steps away. Paranoia? Maybe. But the prickling sensation at the back of her neck told her something had shifted in the office atmosphere during her 3-day absence. "Girl, we need to talk," Emily hissed, appearing seemingly from nowhere and grabbing Alice's elbow. She steered her toward the break room with unusual urgency. "The entire marketing department is buzzing about you and Nicholas." Alice felt her stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" "Apparently, Scott from accounting was at the same hotel in Chicago. He saw you and Nicholas getting off the elevator, looking—" Emily paused dramatically, suspiciously happy. His exact words were, "like two people who just had a moment." The story spread faster than that food poisoning outbreak at last year's company picnic. Alice's face flushed hot, then cold. But nothing happened. The elevator got stuck. We talked. And then what? Emily's eyes widened with interest. And then nothing. The elevator started working again. Alice busied herself with the coffee machine, avoiding Emily's scrutinizing gaze. Well, whatever did or didn't happen, congratulations. You're officially this month's favorite office folklore. The elevator incident, they're calling it. Great, Alice muttered. Just what I needed. Returning to her desk, Alice couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Colleagues who had previously ignored her now gave her curious glances. A group of women from marketing stopped their conversation abruptly when she entered the bathroom. The nickname Miss Lettuce had somehow evolved into the elevator girl, seemingly overnight. When her phone pinged with a meeting request from Nicholas, Alice felt her heart race. Their first interaction since Chicago. She spent the 15 minutes before the meeting overthinking every possible scenario, only to discover it was a department-wide budget review with 12 other people present. Nicholas was cordial but distant, addressing her with the same professional courtesy he extended to everyone else. Not a hint of their almost moment in Chicago registered on his face. Was he regretting what had almost happened? Had he realized a CEO getting involved with an employee was professional suicide? Alice found herself replaying their elevator conversation repeatedly, second-guessing every word, every look. By Wednesday, Alice had developed an elaborate system to minimize any chance encounters with Nicholas. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, timing her lunch to avoid the executive floor's usual break time. Project updates that would normally warrant a face-to-face meeting were sent via detailed emails. When absolutely necessary to be in the same room, she positioned herself as far from Nicholas as possible, speaking only when directly addressed. Her productivity soared as she channeled her emotional turmoil into work, but her professional satisfaction plummeted. Being known for office gossip rather than her accomplishments was becoming increasingly frustrating. In meetings, she could feel eyes on her, assessing, speculating. Were they listening to her ideas, or just wondering if she was sleeping with the boss? This scrutiny seemed to follow a different standard than what Nicholas faced. Male colleagues slapped him on the back, their expressions somewhere between congratulatory and envious. Meanwhile, Alice found herself working twice as hard to be taken seriously, consciously dressing more conservatively, and speaking with deliberate authority in meetings. The situation reached a breaking point during the Thursday marketing strategy session. Alice had prepared an extensive presentation on user engagement metrics, only to be interrupted 3 times by Josh from product development. Maybe we should get the CEO's opinion on this directly, he suggested with a smirk. You seem to have his ear these days. The room went quiet. Alice felt her professional reputation crumbling before her eyes. My data stands on its own merit, Josh. But if you'd like Nicholas to explain basic analytics to you, I'm sure he'd be happy to schedule a remedial session. She powered through the rest of her presentation with rigid professionalism, but inside, she was seething. Her hard work was being overshadowed by whispers about her personal life, or what people thought was her personal life. Nicholas wasn't oblivious to Alice's withdrawal. She noticed him observing her from across the conference room, his brow furrowed slightly when she took the stairs instead of joining him in the elevator. Once, he attempted to engage her in conversation by the coffee machine, asking about her weekend plans, but she answered with polite brevity before excusing herself for an urgent call. A painful professional politeness settled between them, all traces of their easy Chicago rapport gone. He respected her space, never pushing for more than she was willing to give, which somehow made everything worse. Was he relieved she was keeping her distance, or was he as confused as she was? Friday afternoon brought an unexpected development. The quarterly department review, normally a dry recitation of numbers and projections, took an unusual turn when Nicholas began acknowledging individual contributions that had moved the company forward. And, finally, Nicholas said, his gaze finding Alice in the crowd, I want to recognize Alice Park's exceptional impact on our user interface redesign. Her perspective has fundamentally changed how we approach client communication. Betting on people who don't fit the mold was the best decision we made. The room broke into applause. Alice felt a complex mixture of pride and confusion. His public recognition was professionally validating, but the personal distance between them remained unchanged. As people filed out, she caught Nicholas looking at her, a question in his eyes that neither of them seemed ready to ask aloud. Emily caught up with Alice in the hallway. "Okay, that was not nothing. The Nicholas I've known for 3 years doesn't give compliments like that. He's all satisfactory performance and meeting expectations. He was just being professional," Alice insisted, though her heart wasn't convinced. "Professional, my foot. That man just publicly declared you're something special in CEO speak." But by Monday morning, nothing had changed. Nicholas was buried in meetings with investors, and Alice found herself volunteering for a week-long conference on the opposite coast, anything to escape the suffocating atmosphere of being the main character in a corporate romance novel no one had asked her to star in. As she updated her calendar with the conference details, Alice wondered if distance might provide the clarity she so desperately needed. Was she willing to risk her hard-won professional reputation for feelings that might not even be reciprocated? And if Nicholas did share those feelings, was either of them prepared for the consequences that would follow? Sometimes escape becomes its own prison. As Alice boarded her flight to the conference 3,000 miles away from Nicholas, she couldn't shake the irony. She'd volunteered for this trip to gain distance, but now found herself counting the miles between them with every passing minute. What if running from complicated feelings only made them impossible to ignore? The email had arrived with perfect timing. Tech Innovation Summit. Speaker request. Under normal circumstances, Alice would have been thrilled by the opportunity to represent New Gen at such a prestigious event. But these weren't normal circumstances. When she saw Nicholas's electronic signature approving her week-long absence, a knot formed in her stomach. Was he as eager for space as she had been? Alice found herself standing outside Nicholas's office the next morning, fingertips resting lightly on the doorframe. She'd rehearsed what to say a dozen times, yet the words still felt heavy on her tongue. "You approved my conference request," she said simply when he looked up. No accusation, just a statement that somehow managed to convey everything unsaid between them. Nicholas set down his pen with deliberate care. "I thought you might appreciate some distance from—" He gestured vaguely at the space between them. Whatever this is, or isn't, the painful politeness that had characterized their interactions since Chicago suddenly cracked. "Is that what you think I want? Distance?" Alice asked, finally stepping fully into his office. "You've been taking the stairs, Alice," Nicholas said with a hint of a sad smile. "4 flights up and 8 down every day. You redirect conversations when we're alone. You've sent 14 email reports instead of delivering them in person." He wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. What was I supposed to think? Alice felt an unexpected pressure behind her eyes. He'd been counting, just as she'd been counting, his glances, his careful avoidance of touching her arm during meetings, the precise professional tone he maintained. "I thought you regretted what almost happened," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. In the elevator, Nicholas leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk between them. "I've been respecting what I thought were clear boundaries you were setting." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "We've been misreading each other spectacularly, haven't we?" A fragile laugh escaped Alice's lips. Apparently, the silence that followed wasn't awkward as much as thoughtful. Finally, Nicholas spoke. "Maybe the conference is still a good idea. Not to escape, but to gain perspective. Sometimes we need distance to see things clearly." Alice studied his face, searching for hidden meanings. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," Nicholas said carefully, "is for you to know what you want, without workplace politics, without whispers in the hallway, without wondering if your professional recognition is because of, or in spite of, whatever is happening between us." It was the most honest either of them had been since Chicago. Alice nodded slowly. Perspective might be good. The San Francisco Conference Center buzzed with innovation and ambition. Alice's keynote on Thursday morning drew a standing room-only crowd, and her workshop sessions filled to capacity. Business cards accumulated in her hotel room, along with invitations to collaborate and opportunities that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Yet each evening, alone in her hotel room at the Golden Gate Bridge, visible through the window, Alice found herself staring at her phone. No messages from Nicholas. She'd check for the 5th time, set the phone down, pick it up again 20 minutes later. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Space to think. Her presentation on user experience design innovations received thunderous applause. The conference organizer mentioned potential speaking opportunities at their European event. A startup founder offered her a consulting position that would double her salary. All these professional victories should have been exhilarating. Instead, they felt hollow, without someone specific to share them with. Not just anyone, Nicholas. She wanted to see his expression when she told him about the standing ovation, wanted to debate with him about implementation strategies over late-night room service. The realization struck her with unexpected clarity. Professional success meant more when shared with someone who truly understood its value. On Thursday night, she gave in and video called Emily. The prodigal speaker returns. Emily's face filled the screen, her apartment visible in the background. How's the glamorous conference life? Please tell me you're networking with billionaire investors who want to steal you away so I can finally get your desk by the window. Alice laughed, the sound of her friend's voice somehow making her hotel room feel less empty. The conference is great. Lots of interest in our interface redesign. How are things there? Emily's expression shifted subtly. Same old corporate drama, though our fearless leader has been acting strange this week. Alice tried to keep her voice casual. Strange how? Nicholas has been, Emily searched for the right words, unusually serious. No more stopping by people's desks for casual chats. He's been shut in his office with the blinds closed most days. She leaned closer to the camera. And get this, he snapped at Josh from product development yesterday. Josh made some stupid joke about elevator maintenance, and Nicholas just shut him down completely. Something fluttered in Alice's chest. That doesn't sound like Nicholas, right? Josh nearly wet himself. Emily continued. Oh, and Nicholas has been asking about your presentations. Not in an obvious way, but he's been finding reasons to mention the conference in meetings, asking if anyone's heard updates. Alice's fingers tightened around her phone. He has something definitely happened in that elevator, Emily said, eyes narrowing suspiciously. And don't give me that nothing happened line again. I know you too well. Almost happened, Alice corrected softly. Something almost happened. Emily's eyebrows shot up. I knew it. And then what? And then nothing. That's the whole problem, Alice sighed. We've been dancing around each other ever since, both thinking the other one wanted space. And do you want space? Emily asked pointedly. Alice looked out at the San Francisco skyline, 3,000 miles from where she wanted to be. I thought I did, but being here has made me realize something. That you're hopelessly into your boss? Emily supplied, helpfully. That running from complicated feelings only makes them more complicated, Alice corrected, though she couldn't deny the truth in Emily's assessment. I'm coming back Sunday night. Back to work Monday. What are you going to do? Emily asked. Alice smiled, feeling clearer than she had in weeks. Stop running. Monday morning arrived with a crisp clarity. Alice walked through the office with purpose, nodding to colleagues who welcomed her back. The conference had given her perspective, but not in the way she'd expected. Sometimes you had to leave to realize where you belonged. As she approached her desk, Alice noticed something out of place. A small cream-colored note was propped against her keyboard. The handwriting was unmistakable. She'd seen it initialing reports and signing approvals. 5 simple words that made her heart race. You were missed. N. 5 small words on cream-colored paper were all it took to change everything. You were missed. N. As Alice stared at the note sitting innocently on her desk that Monday morning, her heart raced with possibilities. The professional distance she'd carefully maintained for weeks suddenly felt paper-thin and entirely pointless. She picked up her phone, opened her calendar, and froze. There it was, a new entry for tomorrow afternoon. Alignment meeting. Nicholas Smith. No agenda. No other attendees. Just the 2 of them, scheduled for a private conference room on the executive floor. Alice clicked on the notification, scanning for clues. The description field was empty, unusual for Nicholas, who typically included detailed agendas for every meeting. Her finger hovered over the decline button for a moment, before she took a deep breath and pressed accept instead. Whatever this alignment was about, running away hadn't solved anything. It was time to face whatever waited on the other side of that conference room door. The following afternoon, Alice stood outside conference room C, smoothing her blouse and checking her reflection in her phone screen. No lettuce in teeth. No lipstick smudges, just a woman trying desperately to look composed while her insides performed Olympic-level gymnastics. She knocked once, then pushed the door open before she could change her mind. Nicholas stood by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He turned at the sound of the door, and Alice immediately noticed the difference. Gone was the commanding CEO presence she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he looked almost nervous. 2 cups of coffee sat on the table, not in standard office mugs, but in proper ceramic cups from the artisan cafe down the street. "You came," he said, his voice carrying a hint of relief. "It's in my calendar," Alice replied, attempting nonchalance. "Though I have to admit, alignment meeting is cryptic even by executive standards." Nicholas laughed, running a hand through his hair. "I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out what to call it. We need to talk." Seemed too ominous. Coffee break too casual. Discussion about that thing we're not discussing too on the nose? The tension broke slightly as Alice smiled. "So you settled on corporate jargon? It seemed safer than 'I miss you and can't stop thinking about you' meeting," he admitted, gesturing toward the chair opposite his. "Please sit. Coffee's still hot." Alice sat, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "So, this is an alignment meeting about us," Nicholas said simply. "Or whatever this is between us that we've been dancing around since that day with the car window." Something about his directness, his willingness to acknowledge what they'd been avoiding, made Alice's shoulders relax slightly. Nicholas wasn't playing games. "I thought I'd imagined it," she admitted. "Or that maybe I was reading too much into professional courtesy." Nicholas shook his head. "I've been trying to be professional, but I'm finding that difficult when all I want to do is make you laugh." "Did you know you have different laughs for different situations? There's the polite one you use in meetings, the surprised one when someone catches you off guard, and then there's the real one, the one where your whole face lights up." Alice felt her cheeks warm. "You've been cataloging my laughs?" "Among other things," he confessed. "The way you tilt your head when you're considering a problem. How you tap your pen 3 times before writing anything important. The fact that you take the stairs now to avoid elevator situations." "I've been obvious," Alice winced. "We both have. Look, I didn't figure out how to do this without making it awkward," Nicholas continued, leaning forward. "But then I realized we survived the car window incident, the lettuce drama, the broken heel disaster, and being trapped in an elevator. We're practically professionals at navigating awkward situations together." A laugh bubbled up from Alice's chest, her real laugh. "When you put it that way, this is positively tame." Inside jokes were powerful things. The shared reference to their history created an immediate connection, a private universe that only the 2 of them inhabited. Research had shown that such shared humor could act as social glue, reinforcing bonds between people. In this moment, Alice felt that glue strengthening. "I admire everything about you, Alice," Nicholas said, his voice growing serious. "Not just what you do, though your work is exceptional. It's how you do it, how you transform embarrassing moments into opportunities, how you speak to people in a language they understand. You've changed how I think about leadership, about connection." The warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. This wasn't the rehearsed charm of a CEO. This was raw, genuine feeling. "I've been afraid," Alice admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that I was mistaking attention for interest, confusing professional compliments for personal affection. That maybe this was all in my head." Nicholas reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "It's not in your head. My feelings have become more personal over time. And that terrifies me, because I've never felt this way about someone I work with. I know the complications, the potential problems, but pretending these feelings don't exist isn't working." "No," Alice agreed. "It isn't." "So what do we do?" he asked, and Alice was struck by the vulnerability in his question. Here was the decisive CEO, asking her to help chart their course. "We could start by acknowledging what's happening," she said carefully. "Not rushing, but not pretending nothing's there either." Nicholas nodded, taking things slow, but honest. "Exactly, and maybe setting some ground rules for work versus whatever this becomes." "I like the sound of that," Nicholas said, a smile playing at his lips. "Professional at work, but with the freedom to explore this connection outside these walls." The tension that had been building since Chicago, perhaps since that first day at the car window, began to dissolve into something sweeter, more hopeful. Alice felt as though she could breathe fully for the first time in weeks. Nicholas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I got you something. It's not, well, just open it." Alice took the box, their fingers brushing in a way that sent electricity up her arm. Inside, nestled against black velvet, was a small silver keychain. It was shaped like a compact mirror, and when she flipped it open, she found an inscription engraved inside. "Warning, may contain lettuce and feelings." She burst out laughing. That real laugh again, as tears pricked at her eyes. "This is ridiculous." "Is it too much?" Nicholas asked, suddenly unsure. "It's perfect," Alice assured him, closing her fingers around the keychain. "It's the most thoughtful, ridiculous gift I've ever received." Their eyes met across the table, and Alice felt the remaining walls between them crumbling. There was still so much to figure out, but they'd taken the first step. "Have dinner with me tonight," Nicholas said. Not as her boss, but as a man asking a woman he cared about. Not as colleagues or as CEO and employee. Just as two adults, trying to figure out what they're feeling. "I'd like that," Alice replied, the keychain warm in her palm. "But I should warn you, my dining etiquette might include checking my teeth for vegetation in the restaurant window." Nicholas's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Their dinner date had unlocked something beautiful, but as Alice stepped back into her apartment that night, reality waited. The stark contrast between Nicholas's world of fine dining and her own modest studio couldn't be ignored. While the evening replayed in her mind, his laugh, his attentiveness, the promise of what might come, she noticed the envelope she'd tossed aside earlier. Her heart sank as she picked it up, the bold red final notice stamped across the front, shattering her momentary happiness. Despite her new position at New Gen Corp, Alice's financial situation remained precarious. Her salary, while better than anything she'd had before, wasn't enough to climb out from under the mountain of debt that had accumulated. The eviction notice gave her just days to come up with back rent or face homelessness, a brutal reminder that success in one area of life didn't automatically fix everything else. The next morning, Alice arrived at work with dark circles under her eyes and a forced smile that didn't quite reach them. She'd spent the night calculating and recalculating her finances, searching for any possible solution. Even with her recent success, the numbers simply wouldn't add up. Her bank account balance mocked her professional achievements. Nicholas noticed the change immediately. During their morning meeting, he caught her staring blankly at her notes, completely missing a question he'd directed her way. "Everything okay?" he asked, when the others had filed out of the conference room. "Of course," she answered too quickly, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. "Just a little tired. Big presentation next week." Nicholas leaned against the table, studying her face. "You know, for someone who impressed me with her authenticity from day one, you're not very convincing right now." Alice felt her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. The weight of her financial troubles pressed down on her shoulders, making it hard to maintain the professional composure she'd worked so hard to build. But how could she tell him, the CEO, her boss, the man she was falling for, that she couldn't even afford her rent? "It's nothing work-related," she finally offered. "Personal stuff. I'll handle it." Nicholas nodded slowly. "Okay, but if you need anything..." He let the sentence hang between them, an open invitation she couldn't bring herself to accept. The following days became an exercise in compartmentalization. At work, Alice threw herself into projects with renewed vigor, staying late to polish presentations and refine user interface designs. If she was at her desk, she didn't have to think about the looming deadline on her apartment. If she focused on code and user experience flows, she could temporarily forget about the impossibility of her situation. But Nicholas watched. He noticed her arriving earlier each morning, the extra coffee cups accumulating on her desk, the way she jumped slightly whenever her phone buzzed with a text message. Something was wrong, and the distance it created between them felt like a step backward after everything they'd shared. Friday evening found Alice alone in the office, long after everyone else had left. The weekend ahead filled her with dread rather than relief. Just 2 days closer to eviction, with no solution in sight. She'd applied for emergency loans, called distant relatives, even considered selling her laptop, her most valuable possession, and the tool she needed for her job. The quiet knock on her office door startled her. "You're still here," Nicholas stood in the doorway, suit jacket off, tie loosened. "It's almost 9. Just finishing up some things," she said, quickly closing the browser tab, where she'd been researching homeless shelters in the area. Nicholas stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Alice, talk to me. Whatever it is, I'm being evicted." The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them. "Monday. I have until Monday, and then I don't have a place to live." The silence that followed felt endless. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nicholas finally asked, his voice soft. Alice laughed, but it came out harsh and strained. "What was I supposed to say? Hey, I know we're having a great time getting to know each other, but by the way, I can't even afford to keep a roof over my head." She ran her hands through her hair. "It's humiliating, Nicholas. I finally have this amazing job. I'm doing work I love. People actually respect me here. And I'm still failing at the most basic adult responsibility." "You're not failing," Nicholas said firmly, pulling a chair beside hers. "You're dealing with circumstances. Circumstances I should be able to handle by now," she countered. "Do you know how it feels to sit across from you at dinner? In restaurants I could never afford, knowing that I might be sleeping in my car next week?" Nicholas was quiet for a moment, processing. "New Gen has an employee assistance program," he said finally. "It's designed for exactly this kind of situation. Temporary financial hardships that employees face. It's not charity, Alice. It's part of your benefits package." Alice felt her defenses rise. "I don't want special treatment because we're..." She gestured, vaguely, between them. "This has nothing to do with us," Nicholas said. "The program existed long before you joined the company. It's helped dozens of employees through medical emergencies, family crises, housing issues. It's confidential and completely separate from management. I wouldn't even know if you used it unless you told me." The tension in Alice's shoulders remained. "I should be able to handle this myself." "Why?" Nicholas asked simply. "Why is accepting temporary help worse than the alternative?" "Because..." Alice started, then stopped. The truth felt too vulnerable to voice aloud. "Because it confirms what I've been afraid of from the beginning," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That I don't belong in your world. That the distance between where I come from and where you are is too great to bridge." Nicholas leaned forward, his expression serious. "Do you know what research shows about financial stress on relationships?" When Alice shook her head, he continued. "It creates barriers. It leads to misunderstandings and feelings of inadequacy. But the psychology of accepting help is complex. Many people struggle with feelings of pride and shame when faced with needing assistance." "That's exactly it," Alice said quietly. "The shame. But here's what else the research says," Nicholas continued. "Accepting help can be seen as a sign of strength rather than weakness. It allows people to share their burdens and foster deeper connections." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Alice, I don't want you to be perfect. I want you to be you. The woman who used my car window as a mirror, who had lettuce in her teeth during an interview, who broke her heel at a gala, the woman who has never once tried to hide her humanity from me." Alice felt tears threatening. "But this feels different. This feels bigger." "It's not," Nicholas insisted. "It's just another part of being human. Accepting help isn't failing. It's living with a little less weight on your shoulders while you get back on your feet." The next morning, Alice found herself in a small office on the 3rd floor, sitting across from a kind-faced woman who explained the employee assistance program in detail. There was no judgment in her eyes, only efficiency and warmth as she processed the paperwork that would provide Alice with emergency housing assistance and a short-term loan. "We see this more often than you'd think," the woman said gently. "Even with good salaries, people hit rough patches. Medical bills, family emergencies, student loans. Life happens." Walking back to her desk afterward, Alice felt lighter than she had in weeks. The shame wasn't completely gone. She suspected it would take time for that to fade. But it was overshadowed by an unexpected sense of connection. By allowing herself to be vulnerable with Nicholas, she'd discovered a new dimension to their relationship, one built on honesty rather than appearances. When Nicholas stopped by her desk later that day, there was no mention of the assistance program or her financial situation. Instead, he simply asked, "Dinner tonight?" Alice smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in days. "I'd like that." With a simple yes to dinner, Alice had no idea she was stepping onto a path that would transform their relationship from professional to permanent. What happens when a lakeside getaway becomes the stage for the most important question Nicholas has ever asked? 3 months after accepting help through the Employee Assistance Program, Alice found herself packing for what Nicholas described as a much-needed weekend away from spreadsheets and stockholders. She smiled at his text message. "Just bring comfortable clothes, your favorite book, and that laugh I missed hearing while you were at the conference." The wooden cabin nestled against a shimmering lake took Alice's breath away. Far from the skyscrapers and city noise, it stood as a testament to simplicity, with its weathered cedar planks and wraparound porch. Nicholas watched her reaction carefully as they stepped from the car, his eyes reflecting something beyond their usual confidence. Anticipation, perhaps, or nervousness. "My grandfather built this place with his own hands," Nicholas explained, carrying their bags inside. No smart home features, no voice assistants, just 4 walls and a fireplace. The cabin's interior welcomed them with the rich scent of pine and leather, family photos lining natural wood shelves. Alice ran her fingers along a handmade quilt draped over the sofa, sensing this retreat held deeper meaning for Nicholas than a simple weekend escape. That evening, wrapped in borrowed sweaters against the lake's gentle chill, they sipped hot chocolate on the dock. Nicholas seemed unusually reflective, pointing out constellations and sharing childhood memories of summers spent fishing with his grandfather. "He taught me that success isn't measured by your office size," Nicholas confessed, "something I forgot somewhere between business school and quarterly reports." The following morning brought golden sunlight streaming through cabin windows. After breakfast, Nicholas suggested a boat ride. "The lake is calmest in the morning," he said, helping Alice into a weathered rowboat that had clearly seen generations of use. The simple wooden vessel rocked gently beneath them as Nicholas rowed, his powerful strokes carrying them farther from shore. When they reached the center of the lake, Nicholas suddenly shipped the oars. The boat drifted to perfect stillness, surrounded by nothing but water and sky. The only sounds were distant birdsong and water lapping gently against wood. Alice watched curiously as Nicholas took a deep breath, his knuckles white against the boat's edge. "I brought you here because this place represents everything I thought I didn't need," he began, his voice carrying across the water's surface. "Simplicity, peace, connection to something beyond quarterly goals and market share." His eyes found hers, unguarded in a way Alice had never seen before. "Then you used my car window as an impromptu vanity mirror, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about myself changed." Alice laughed softly, remembering their unconventional first meeting, but fell silent as Nicholas continued. "You taught me to laugh at myself when I'd forgotten how. You showed me that authenticity isn't just some corporate buzzword. It's having the courage to be exactly who you are, lettuce and teeth and all." His voice caught slightly. "Before you, I measured my days and accomplishments. Now I measure them in moments that make us laugh until we can't breathe." The boat rocked gently as Nicholas shifted his weight, reaching into his pocket. "I realized something recently. The moments that matter most aren't the ones where everything goes perfectly, according to plan. They're the ones where we're completely ourselves, even when it's awkward or embarrassing or terrifying." When he opened his palm, a simple ring with a single diamond caught the morning light. Not ostentatious, but radiant, much like their relationship. "Alice Park, would you consider making this the next chapter of our story? The one where the girl who fixed her bra in a stranger's car window and the CEO who couldn't stop thinking about her decide to build a life together." Tears welled in Alice's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at Nicholas, seeing not the powerful CEO, but the man who had embraced every imperfect, authentic part of her journey. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carrying across the still water. "Absolutely yes." Their embrace nearly capsized the small boat, both laughing through tears as water splashed over the sides. With the ring secured on her finger, they held each other in the middle of the lake, witnessed only by the mountains and sky, a perfect reflection of their relationship that had blossomed away from society's expectations. 3 months later, their wedding unfolded on a small stretch of beach, just a short walk from the cabin. Only 30 guests gathered to witness their union, a stark contrast to the corporate galas and investor events that had marked their early relationship. Alice wore a simple white dress that caught the breeze, her hair flowing freely, rather than confined in her usual professional style. Nicholas waited for her in a crisp white shirt, rolled at the sleeves, his face transforming at the sight of her walking toward him. The workplace that had brought them together was represented by only a handful of colleagues who had become true friends. Emily, in a flowing lilac dress, beaming with approval, and a few others who had witnessed their journey from awkward first meeting to something genuine and lasting. When the time came for their vows, the gathered friends and family weren't prepared for what they heard. In accordance with the workplace studies showing that shared humor strengthens relationships, their words mingled laughter with profound commitment. Alice, steady-voiced despite her emotion, promised, "I vow to love you through promotions and setbacks, through successes and failures. I promise to remind you of what matters when spreadsheets and stockholders demand too much. And," she added with perfect comic timing, "I promise never to adjust my bra in a car window again, unless it's yours." The laughter that rippled through their small gathering carried across the water as Nicholas took his turn. His voice, usually commanding boardrooms with confidence, now trembled slightly with emotion. "I vow to value your authenticity above any professional mask. I promise to make you laugh, especially on the hard days when laughter seems impossible. And I promise to always leave the window up if you need an emergency mirror." As they exchanged rings beneath the open sky, their workplace beginnings transformed into something timeless and personal. The embarrassing car window incident had evolved from a potential career-ending disaster into the foundation of their love story, proof that sometimes life's most mortifying moments lead to its greatest joys. At the intimate reception that followed, Emily presented Alice with a gift that brought fresh tears to her eyes, a handcrafted mug inscribed with the words, "The Lady of the Mirror," and the lettuce. What once caused Alice such embarrassment had become a cherished part of their shared history, a testament to how they had transformed potential humiliation into treasured memory. Around 30% of couples meet in workplace settings, according to the research Alice had recently read, but few could claim an origin story quite as memorable as theirs. Their relationship had flourished precisely because they had seen each other at their most authentic from the very beginning. No pretense, no carefully constructed professional personas. Nicholas leaned close during their first dance, whispering, "Thank you for teaching me that a CEO can learn more from a broken heel in a stalled elevator than from any business book." Alice smiled against his shoulder. "And thank you for seeing past the lettuce." Their wedding incorporated each meaningful step of their journey, from the company logo, subtly woven into the table centerpieces, to the compact mirrors, given as favors, each engraved with "Life's reflections matter." The collision of their professional and personal worlds had created something neither could have imagined that first, embarrassing day. 2 months after the joyful celebration of their marriage, Alice stood in their living room gripping a small package wrapped in blue paper. Her heart raced with anticipation as she checked the clock again. Nicholas would be home any minute. This wasn't just any gift. This carefully wrapped package contained something that would transform their love story into something even more beautiful, even more profound. The simple t-shirt folded inside carried just 3 words that would change everything. The sound of keys in the door sent a rush of adrenaline through Alice's body. She quickly smoothed her blouse, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as Nicholas walked in, his tired expression immediately brightening at the sight of her. "There's my favorite person," he said, setting down his briefcase and crossing the room to kiss her. "You look different today. Something's changed." Alice smiled, wondering if he could somehow sense the secret she'd been keeping for the past 2 weeks. The doctor had confirmed it during her appointment yesterday, 2 months along, everything looking healthy. She'd spent all day planning this moment, wanting to make it as special as their journey had been so far. "I have something for you," she said, her voice wavering slightly as she handed him the blue package. Nicholas raised an eyebrow, taking the gift with curious hands. "It's not my birthday, and our anniversary isn't for 10 more months. What's the occasion?" "Just open it," Alice urged, clasping her hands together to stop them from trembling. He carefully unwrapped the package, folding the paper neatly as he always did. The methodical CEO, even in their most intimate moments. When he lifted the simple white t-shirt, the black letters across the front came into view. "Dad in training." The confusion on his face lasted only seconds before realization dawned. His eyes widened, darting between the shirt and Alice's face, then down to her stomach, which showed no visible signs yet of the life growing within. "Really?" he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. The t-shirt trembled in his hands. Alice nodded, tears forming in her eyes. 2 months along. I found out for sure yesterday." Nicholas stood frozen, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, overwhelming joy. The man who commanded boardrooms and navigated million-dollar deals with unwavering confidence was suddenly speechless, tears forming in his eyes. "We're having a baby?" he finally managed, his voice barely audible. Alice nodded again, a tear spilling down her cheek. "We're having a baby." The t-shirt dropped to the sofa as Nicholas crossed the space between them in 2 strides, wrapping her in an embrace so gentle, yet so secure, that Alice felt her own emotions overflow. His hand moved cautiously to her stomach, resting there with reverent tenderness. "The best gift of my life," he whispered against her hair. "You and this baby, the best gifts I could ever receive." Alice leaned into his embrace, savoring the warmth and strength of the man who had gone from stranger to husband to father-to-be. The journey from that mortifying first encounter to this moment of profound joy seemed almost too perfect to be real. "Are you scared?" she asked softly. Nicholas pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands still cradling her, as if she were made of glass. "Terrified," he admitted with a laugh. "But in the best possible way, the same way I felt when I realized I was falling in love with the woman who used my car window as a personal vanity mirror." That made Alice laugh through her tears. Their beginning had been so unconventional, their differences seemingly so vast. A struggling woman fighting to stay afloat, and a successful CEO with the world at his fingertips. Yet here they stood, those differences having strengthened rather than weakened their bond. "I never thought this would be my life," Alice confessed, placing her hand over his, where it rested on her stomach. "When I was trying to fix my appearance in what I thought was a tinted window, I wasn't thinking about meeting someone, falling in love, starting a family. I was just trying to survive another day." Nicholas guided her to the sofa, sitting beside her and keeping her hand in his. "Life has a funny way of giving us what we need when we're looking for something else entirely," he said. "I was looking for an employee who could think outside the box. Instead, I found the woman who would completely redesign my entire life." The evening light streamed through their windows as they sat together, imagining the future that now included a third heart beating alongside theirs. Nicholas couldn't stop touching her stomach, marveling at how something so monumental could be contained in such an imperceptible change. "Do you think our embarrassing first meeting story is appropriate for a child?" Alice asked, with a mischievous smile. Nicholas laughed. "Maybe we'll edit it slightly until they're teenagers, though I'm sure they'll hear plenty of versions from Emily and the rest of the office before then." Their relationship had blossomed, despite workplace gossip, despite the visible socio-economic gap between them, despite every obstacle that might have kept them apart. Research showed that shared embarrassing experiences often strengthened relationships by creating vulnerability and authenticity between partners. And they certainly had the foundation in spades. "Half mine, half yours," Alice whispered, looking down at her stomach. "A perfect combination of both of us." Nicholas's eyes filled with wonder. "I hope they have your resilience," he said softly, "and your ability to turn disaster into opportunity. And I hope they have your kindness," Alice returned. "The way you see people for who they really are, not just what they appear to be." Studies indicated that couples who initially meet in workplace settings often developed strong foundations for their relationships. Alice and Nicholas were living proof of that statistic, their professional understanding of each other having created a deep reservoir of mutual respect that underpinned their love. As the evening deepened into night, they remained on the sofa, planning and dreaming. Nicholas insisted on downloading 3 different pregnancy apps before Alice gently took his phone away, reminding him they had months to prepare. They debated names, wondered about gender, and imagined how their little one might blend their personalities. "I should warn you," Nicholas said with mock seriousness. "My father was a mechanic, remember? If this child inherits my genes, they'll be taking apart every electronic device in the house by age 3. And if they take after me," Alice countered, "they'll be using random reflective surfaces for emergency grooming sessions." They laughed together, the joy of their shared future eclipsing any lingering anxiety. Through the window, the city lights twinkled like distant stars, witnesses to the expanding universe of love in this apartment. Later that night, as Alice drifted toward sleep in Nicholas's arms, she marveled at how life's most mortifying moments could lead to its greatest joys. From lettuce stuck between her teeth to a child growing within her, the journey had been nothing like she'd expected, and everything she'd never known to hope for. In this remarkable journey we've witnessed, we find the most powerful truth about human connection. It's not our polished personas, but our unguarded moments that forge the deepest bonds. Alice and Nicholas found love, not despite their awkward encounters, but because of them. Each vulnerable moment, from that mortifying car window incident to honest conversations about financial struggles, created a foundation stronger than any rehearsed impression ever could. Research confirms what their story illustrates so beautifully. Vulnerability creates stronger connections than perfection. When we allow others to see our authentic selves, spinach in teeth, broken heels, and all, we open the door to relationships that transcend superficial boundaries. Their love story reminds us that sometimes life's most embarrassing moments become our greatest gifts, revealing who truly sees us for who we are. In the end, it wasn't their professional achievements or social status that mattered. It was their willingness to be seen, truly seen, in all their imperfect glory that created something magical. From chance encounter to family creation, Alice and Nicholas remind us that sometimes the universe has better plans than we could ever imagine.